तुम।
Don't delay, subscribe to Z Cinema now. For more details in Kuwait, call 2401 978. That's 2401 978.
For over 60 years, the BBC has been broadcasting to Asia on radio and television.
Welcome back.
Now, NewsHour Asia Pacific focuses international news for Asia.
Across Asia, the epidemic has spread in a period of 5 years.
The world's biggest news-gathering machine harnesses global reporting of international issues.
Well, joining me now to discuss the dangers threatening the
Reshuffle
survival.
came amid pomp and pageantry.
And Asia File brings you special reports from our correspondents in Asia.
They know what the general mood of the Pacific is.
Journalism built on traditional BBC values. World news that is impartial, accurate and comprehensive.
We don't just report the news, we explain it. Analysing the facts is as important as the facts themselves.
Join leading international presenters for NewsHour Asia Pacific, Monday to Friday at these times on BBC World. For over 30 years, one man has interviewed hundreds of key international leaders and discussed critical world issues. David Frost talks to global decision makers every Sunday at these times on BBC World.
Now on BBC World, Margaret Thatcher traces her life from childhood to Prime Minister in conversation with David Frost, the path to power and beyond.
I was turned out because I said to Europe, no, no, no. That no, no, no was turned into yes, yes.
We were once one evening both at a performance of Sunset Boulevard, I remember, and there's that memorable scene where someone says, "Isn't that Norma Desmond? She used to be big." And Norma Desmond says, "I still am big. It's the movies that have got small." Do you sometimes feel a bit like Norma Desmond saying, "I still am big, it's the politics that have got small"?
Not in the least. I was not a Hollywood star. I was a mere politician, doing what I passionately believed in, speaking my own words, creating my own way forward, doing my own lines because of what I believed, never climbing into someone else's personality. And I reckon if you go into politics, then you must expect to be fired at in all kinds of debates. That's just the nature of what it's about. You have to justify your policy again and again. But the words, the policies, the lines, the speech were mine.
Well, I thought we'd divide our conversation into 3 parts. Later on, the years as a professional politician, getting to the top, and then, of course, life after number 10. But we begin with your early life, your family life, and your roots. What did your father look like to people who met him for the first time? Can you give me a sense of how he looked physically?
He was tall. He was about 6 feet tall, and very, very fair hair, almost albino fairness, and very blue eyes. He had not good sight because the eyes were so very blue and the hair so fair, so he wore glasses. He had very good bone structure. He was tall, upright. He had very firm principles, and they showed in his face. And he was always very well turned out, not expensively turned out, but very tidily turned out. I remember him very much as he was in a grocer's shop. Of course, you'd have the big apron with the white front as well, because you're often dealing with things that required an apron. But he was always, strange to say, he was always very much in command. He had a natural air of authority and command. I suppose it comes from being certain what you believe in. And many people among our acquaintances also had that same certainty. It was a very wholesome, real world.
So you inherited certainty?
I think I must have done.
And you said that he used to go to the library once a week, great believer in the library, a serious book for himself and for you, and a novel for your mother.
I was fond of reading. We also read the newspapers. They were troublesome, but interesting times. Don't forget the 30s. The 30s were the period of rising unemployment, of a worldwide depression. We had cousins in America who lost everything in the depression in America. It was also the time of the rise of Hitler. And there was also, though we didn't know a great deal about it at the time until we learned through reading, communism, of course, and Stalin. They were a combination of some of the most difficult years we've been through. I've often puzzled about it, that the two worst tyrannies, I think of all time, certainly of our century, came from Europe. And we had to spend the rest of the century getting rid of.
So Europe was causing trouble even back in the 30s?
Oh yes, and if you lived in a family which took a great interest in what was happening, I listened. I much preferred to listen to adult conversation than to the conversation of my own contemporaries.
It was in your childhood that you, for instance, encountered the work of the poet Ella Wheeler Wilcox, wasn't it?
Yes, I think she expressed things so perfectly. I remember one very well. If the ship drives east, the ship drives west. Whatever the gale that blows, 'tis the set of the sail and not the gale that determines the way she goes. That is to say, it's not the circumstances that you see in life, but the way you approach them, the set of your own personality that determines how you can go forward.
This is a picture that will bring back memories.
Oh, that was it. We did a big nativity play at our church one Christmas. Yes, I suppose it was the last time I'd been an angel. Angel, you can't see, my mother made the outfit, and there were big wings that we made with wire and muslin. My father was also one of the shepherds.
Was he?
Yes, but I can't see him on this photograph.
No, it's rather small. Everybody has commented that your father obviously was the powerful influence in your life more than your mother, and they all say that you didn't put her in Who's Who for many years and so on and so forth.
I didn't even realize she wasn't in Who's Who.
Until someone pointed it out. Yeah. Was she, you said once she was a bit of a Martha, meaning that she was really focused on the home, yeah?
She was focused on the home. Cleanliness was next to godliness. Things that there was a very, very big spring cleaning every year. You see, we didn't have vacuum cleaners in those days. We didn't have refrigerators. You did your cleaning with dustpan and brush, and it was jolly hard. You'd be going all up and down the stairs.
But both at Grantham and then you say at Oxford, you would say that you used to take long walks on my own.
Yes, I did.
Now, do you think, in fact, looking back over your life, that that's not accidental, that you have always been something of a loner?
Yes, I think I have been a loner all my life. Perhaps it was a very tough creed. You see, I remember I wanted sometimes to go out with friends more often, perhaps on Sunday evenings. All my friends go out on Sunday evenings for a walk. Can I go with them? Never do something just because other people do it, my father said. Never just follow the crowd. Never. Make up your own mind what you want to do, and then do it. My goodness, that was tough, but it stayed with me for the rest of my life. Never just follow the crowd. make up your own mind.
What was it about Oxford that actually persuaded you wanted to be an MP? What happened at Oxford? What was the Damascus moment?
I didn't crystallize it at all until one evening at home. I think it was just after the end of the war, when I went to a village dance with a great friend of mine who was also at Oxford at Lady Margaret Hall. And we were just sitting round in the kitchen. They had a large kitchen, old-fashioned kitchen, talking afterwards. And I was talking politics. One of the people there, it was one of the men there, there was a whole lot of us just talking, said, "What you really want to do is to be an MP, isn't it?" And it just crystallized it for me. And I said, yes. That's it. I do.
Later on, we come to Dennis comes to Grantham to ask for your hand in marriage, and you say, when Dennis asked me to be his wife, I thought long and hard about it. Was the pause while you thought to do with the question of marriage, or the question of Dennis?
We both took it very, very seriously, obviously. And I think it's because you take it so seriously, for life, because you work these things out, because you don't go into it saying, well, if it doesn't work, I can get out of it. That's what makes it work and last for life. You fall in love with someone, there's got to be something else too. There's got to be genuine companionship. You've got to have something in common. And you've got to have a generosity towards one another. You've got to understand that home is the center of your life, and you will have a family. It is not the boundary of your experience. And home is the place which you can always come back and always find a welcome. So yes, I did think about it. And because I had thought about it, and because he thought about it before asking me, it has just been the best thing, in the deepest sense, that could ever happen to me, and has enabled so many other things to happen.
Yes, because you say in the book that it was one of the best decisions you ever made. But were there any other that were as good?
It was the one which enabled all other things to happen. All other things. Don't forget, how could I have done anything without Dennis in politics? I couldn't have done anything in politics had there been any friction with him. And he's been just absolutely marvelous. And he has built his own reputation and niche in the hearts and minds of British people.
Oh, he certainly.
It's the best decision.
Fun?
You can't choose your parents. They make that decision. You can choose your children's parents.
And in terms of growing up in the public spotlight and so on, how much pressure does a mother who's so in the public eye put on the children in terms of the media and so on? A lack of privacy?
I think it is a lack of privacy, yes. Lack of privacy. It's just one of the things that is consequent upon the work. And you have to do everything you can to ensure their privacy. After all, they do have a good family life, which is a great thing, the greatest thing of all.
People say about Mark that he uses your name.
Now, I'm not going to discuss my children. We've been saying it's vital for them, in fact, to keep their privacy.
Then we come on to the period, of course, when Ted Heath runs for the leadership and gets it. And you voted for Ted Heath. And you said about my acquaintanceship with Ted, though there was none of that bitter hostility which would develop in later years, had never risked developing into friendship.
No, Ted was not a friendly person. He, again, was another loner in a different way. One had the feeling this was a very efficient man. One was surprised that he was such a marvelous musician, because a musician touches the emotions. Perhaps it was because of that his emotions went into music. His own people respected him very well. But no, friendship, no. Respect, yes.
And you say here, he was probably more at ease talking to men than women. Do you think that's also true of you?
I'm more comfortable talking about the things I like to talk about. And there are more men who will talk about finance and politics than there are women.
And in that context, in terms of being a woman, as you look across the whole range of your life, I mean, public and private and personal, I mean, have you ever thought that you would have rather been a man, or do you enjoy being a girl?
I've no idea what it would be like to be a man, and I've enjoyed my life as it is. I've enjoyed my married life as it is. No, I've never once thought I would like to be a man. Never.
Moving on from that to the Heath government, 70-74, here's a quote. Well, you say that the lesson of the Heath government was that socialist policies pursued by Tory politicians are, if anything, even more disastrous than socialist policies pursued by Labour politicians.
That is right, because somehow we allowed ourselves to drift into them. And this was so on a very, very conservative manifesto that we fought on in 1970, and which Ted believed in. Everything went wrong at once. And so we did turn to what we had rejected when the socialists introduced a prices and income policy between 1966 and 70. We turned to it again. And of course, again, it was denying choice. And we weren't really being true to what we believed in.
And there was a reflationary budget. And you muse in the book, you say, should I have resigned? Perhaps so.
Yes, in retrospect, I think one should. There were half a dozen very, very brave and bold conservative backbenchers, the Nick Ridleys, the Bruce Gardynes, the John Biffins, and also the Enoch Powell, who said, look, this is wrong, absolutely wrong.
Yes, so 70 to 74, you were not yet the fully formed conviction politician.
Fully formed.
You were embryonic.
We hadn't fully worked out the relationship between wages, inflation, public expenditure.
So that when would you say that the fully formed conviction politician, the Thatcherite, emerged? Some people say 79, but others say actually it was more likely 81 when you felt free to be yourself.
It was 79. After we lost in 1974, you'll remember that Keith Joseph, who was a mighty man, one of the greatest minds and one of the most humble people in the true sense of the word, started the Centre of Policy Studies. The feeling was getting about that no government dare close down any big industry, any big plant, a big car plant or a big engineering company. No government dared do it. You'd always get a subsidy. And they did. This I had to change.
And at this time, there's obviously the defeat for Ted Heath, and then there is another defeat later in the year. And you had no doubt, you said, after that second defeat in that year of 74, you had no doubt that Ted should go.
I had no doubt at that time. It was such a pity that he retreated from things that he believed in, but we did learn a lot from that retreat, and I felt that he should go. But he could have won the election. He could have won the leadership election. Then I would not have been in the cabinet because I had fought him with very different ideas. And the press didn't really take me seriously. Eventually, when it was clear that I was standing, I went to talk to one of the press clubs, and I eventually said to them, look, I think perhaps you better begin to take me a bit seriously, because by this time I was fighting for what I believed in very strongly. And I don't know whether they ever did. But it must, you know, have been a terrible shock to Ted when on the first ballot I got more than he did, quite a lot more. It really must. And he did pull out with great dignity then. But he must have been very hurt, and I knew that.
Must have been And a very big shock.
A very big shock. And he just quietly, I think, withdrew. And then, it was only then that other people came forward for the second round. And then many people just thought that I had been the person who brought about the change, and someone else. And indeed, at first, I thought that Willie Whitelaw would obviously get it. Willie's a very considerable person, a rather wonderful person, a great instinct for politics, as big-minded as he is big-framed, a marvellous person. And I thought that he would get it, but life went differently.
Is the great quote true? Did you really say on one occasion about Willie Whitelaw, everyone needs a Willie? Is that a true statement?
Yes, it is. And if, you know, a Willie Whitelaw.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also said...
I'm afraid I didn't see some of the things behind these words that other people did, because I didn't think that way.
And people ask at that time with Jim Pryor at employment and so on, why didn't you, and Reggie Maudlin as Foreign Secretary and so on, why didn't you make more of a clean sweep, decisive clean sweep at that stage of making appointments and so on? But one of the reasons was that, I mean, your hold on the leadership initially presumably was quite fragile, and you had to show unity, create unity, by appointing some people who you didn't necessarily agree with.
I think you had to, yes, I think you had to have some of those. After all, there'd been some of them in shadow cabinet. I think you had to have some of them in cabinet. And frankly, we were more able to deal with them in cabinet than we would have been if they'd all joined forces on the back benches and argued against some of the policies we wanted to put through. We only had a majority of 4 to 5. That sounds quite large now, doesn't it? We only had a majority of 4 to 5.
Enter Gordon Rees at this point in the proceedings, who you praise in the book for his contribution, particularly in terms of image and getting the message across. And he had views, for instance, you said, on hair and clothes, for example. What did he say there?
Gordon was absolutely terrific. He was at Central Office and wanting to see me one day very early after I'd become leader. He knew exactly what needed to be done, and he understood that it wasn't enough to have the right policies. One had to look good in putting them over, and he said my hair had to be changed, and we'd better have a look at the makeup, and we'd better have a look at the clothes, and see how they looked on television and so on. And I hadn't taken any notice of these things before. But he was very good. He was a real professional.
And then he paid attention, you said, to the matter of my voice, as you said.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Which needed to be lowered, did it, or what?
When you feel strongly about something, sometimes a woman's voice tends to rise and get a little bit shrill. I had been very conscious of this and really had tried to deal with it by kind of speaking at the back of my throat. You know, you can lower your voice by speaking at the back of your throat, and it's much lower. And of course, it's very bad for your throat. And very soon you'll start coughing and spluttering. And Gordon said, look, you can't do this. I know someone who will really teach you how to breathe. You have to do the same for singing. And this rather remarkable lady came along. She taught me to breathe properly, right, to breathe from here, and to push the voice, not from the back of your throat. Push the voice forward. Speak from the forefront of your mouth, as I'm doing now. And if you bring the air, the breathing upright, your voice will lower. It is lower, even though I speak now from the forefront of my mouth and not there.
So it's lower now?
It's lower, but lower because one is breathing properly.
And did you speak, because you're breathing properly, did you speak slightly more slowly than you did before?
No, I don't think so. I think I tend to speak more slowly because I want to get the point across. And because sometimes it's not a very good thing necessarily to have, but sometimes it is. You tend to know that if you're teaching something, you tend to go more slowly for it to sink in.
Now, in this period, 1975, 76, 1977, as leader of the opposition, you say that it also soon became clear that powerful elements of the party were out to make trouble for me. You were still feeling, those who felt like you and yourself were still feeling a bit like outsiders to the sort of Tory grandee establishment?
We weren't wholly comfortable in the position that I was holding. And people were saying constantly, you must take a confidence motion because we must get back in as soon as possible. Ironically, I don't think we would have won had there been an earlier election. Ironically, without the Lib-Lab Pact, we might not have won a sufficient majority to do the things that I needed to do, so we had to go on yet further in opposition.
And during that period in opposition, at one stage, Ted Heath joined Harold Macmillan in suggesting a government of national unity of some kind, which you think that Harold Macmillan wanted to lead, expected to lead, and you went to see him and discuss that with him. How was that meeting?
It was suggested that things were going so badly that we should offer a coalition government, or I think Harold Macmillan felt not so much that we should offer it, but that it would soon be offered to us. Things are so difficult. Would you join a government of national unity, a coalition government? And it was quite obvious that some people in my party thought that if that call came, I would not necessarily be the right person to do it, but it should be someone with more experience who'd join in that national government. Now, I'd heard about this, and I spoke to Maurice Macmillan. I said, look, I really would rather like to see your father. And Maurice said, would like to see me. So we met in Maurice's house near Victoria. And I was in the upstairs sitting room. And I heard Harold Macmillan, who I knew thought that he would be a suitable person to take the helm again. I heard him say to Maurice, has the call come yet? And I heard Maurice say, no, not quite. And I really wanted to consult Harold as to how best to play the role, because he was an excellent tactician. But all of these things, one knew were going on. And after all, he was very, very able, had great experience, and really must have felt that he needn't have resigned when he did in 1963. So all of these things were reasonable, and I was very inexperienced, but my goodness me, I was learning fast. Events made me learn fast, and I was firm. That was the great thing.
And in the period since you left office, 1990, with all the different crises, have you ever turned to your associates and said, has the call come yet?
Never. Never go back. I was very fortunate to be there 11 and a half years. Yes, I was really rather concerned when, having got the troops out to the Gulf, in the middle of what was going to be a battle, I had to leave, even though I got more votes than my successor. But I left. Never try to go back in life. If there is a terrible crisis of such enormous magnitude that you have to think about it, the answer would show itself.
You said that one of the few regrets you have is that your departure, when it came, prevented me from coming to grips with the rapidly changing scene in Europe. And you said you were not prepared for the speed with which the position you had adopted would be reversed, entirely reversed. That was what you were not prepared for.
No, I wasn't. And I would never have signed the Maastricht Treaty. I was just a bonny fighter, but I was very much aware of how alone I often was. And I don't think the Foreign Office were always behind me. Indeed, I had to fight quite hard, and did.
And then the policies were reversed, but they needn't have been reversed, you mean?
No, they needn't have been reversed. The phrase European Union was only in the preamble to the original treaty. In the preamble, it is not really determining the future policy. In the Maastricht Treaty, they've gone into the fundamental text, and so has the objective of common European monetary policy and a single currency. So has the objective of common defense and common foreign policy. This is not right. It's not right for the world. It's not right for Britain.
And in fact, as things developed, you made your decision to leave the House of Commons because of the impossibility of putting your views there. So that it was, in a sense, your consideration on that issue that really tipped the scales about leaving the House of Commons. You say, I would inhibit him, meaning John Major, just by my presence, and that in turn would inhibit me. So that was the key reason why you left the House of Commons?
Yes, it was. I didn't want him to feel I was breathing down his neck the whole time, or that I had any idea of coming back. Don't go back. And it's not fair on your successor. And I thought he'd feel that so long as I was there, I was hoping to come back. And I thought it'd be better for him and better for me if I said, look, I'm going to have a clean break. So you don't need, you're free as far as I'm concerned. And naturally, although I feel very strongly about some things in which Europe is one, obviously in America another, and our strong defense another, and our rule of law, and our parliamentary traditions, most of all, I didn't think we'd ever let those go to the extent that we are.
Well, let's take a look at the future, at your, your game plan for Europe, as it were. You say, as we approach the various points you think we should do, you say we shouldn't be under any illusion that we are, quote, winning the argument of Europe. We're not at the moment.
They're avoiding the argument. They're not going to the fundamental issue of what a single currency would do. It would mean that we would never again have the power to issue our own currency. Never again have control over it. Never. So I would say no single currency. This demeans Britain, because we cease to have control either over the central bank or over our own currency. In the end, it would come under, of course, the Deutschmark. Had we been told all of that more clearly, to the extent to which it is happening, when we had the debate about going in, we'd have made it quite clear that we wanted only a limited single market or common market in Europe, and that was all.
Yes, because you would say, people would say that even in the original, as you say, going in even the Treaty of Rome, you could, reading the lines and between the lines, I mean, there was obviously going to be some surrender of sovereignty involved, wasn't there?
There were a lot of weasel words. No, we're not giving up parliamentary sovereignty. We're merely pooling it. Well, I ask you, isn't it absurd? Parliamentary sovereignty means you make your own decisions. Pooling it means that you're one in 13, 14, or 15. You've lost the power of decision-making, except where the vote is unanimous. And the Commission is busy trying to undermine the unanimity vote, to undermine your right of veto. In other words, it always seemed to me that Mr. Kinnock, having gone to be a commissioner, has more power as a commissioner than he had as leader of the opposition, or if we're not careful, than anyone would ever have as Prime Minister.
So first of all, declare against a single currency now. Secondly, do you feel we should make clear that there is no question of sterling's return to the ERM or any successor system, not as we're saying now, not in the foreseeable future, but ever?
Not to any rigid policy. Do you remember that black day? I was in America.
White
I turned
day.
on the news.
Do you think of it as black or white?
I don't know. Terrible day.
Grey?
Terrible day. Just terrible. I turned on the early morning news, and the interest rate had gone up by 2%. But a couple of hours later, it had gone up from about 11 up to 15%. I said, what are they doing? They have to come out. So we had both of those experiences. I think we should have a free trade area covering both NAFTA, that's the North American free trade area, and the common market. That then would underpin NATO.
So let's have let's have a two-tier system, and let us be part of the European Free Trade Area rather than the hardcore European Union.
Yes.
But how do we persuade 14 other reluctant countries? Why should they agree to do these things we suggest?
They want to go further than Maastricht. To me, that is ridiculous. If they want to do it, I don't believe we should stop them, provided they let us do what we want to do. So if we consent to them forming their own particular arrangement from which we are excluded. That's fine by us, provided we can do those things which we think we need to do.
Could you envisage, in fact, a situation in which we would have to withdraw completely from the European Union?
No, I would prefer to stay within that, and I will tell you why. Because at the moment, under the GATT, you can have special provision if you are a customs union.
And one of the things that you've also mentioned that we ought to consider doing is to amend the 1972 European Communities Act to establish ultimate supremacy of Parliament. Now,
we'd have to amend the 1972 Act. We were assured so many times we weren't giving up parliamentary sovereignty.
Why didn't you do that while you were in power?
First, because I think the whole magnitude of it hadn't been realized. We wanted a single market. I fought for a single market, but I put certain protections in the single market which are not being honored. They're like that, and I know it now, but I didn't until after I'd left office.
Although there were some people who did fear that at the time, weren't there? I mean, the second reading of the Single European Act, people like Teddy Taylor and Bill Cash and Enoch Powell warned that this was something more than a mere economic collaboration.
They turned out to be...
They were right. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, you were wrong.
And they were right. They hadn't any faith in the way in which it would be implemented. I had, but once bitten, twice shy.
Teddy Taylor brings to mind the question of the Tory rebels. Did you have a sense of schizophrenia about them? Because on the one hand, they were rebelling against the party. You only ever voted against the party once. On the other hand, they were saying everything you believed.
Look, I simply didn't understand why the whip was taken away from them. Members of Parliament aren't pure rubber stamps. Sometimes you'd be absent from a vote if you didn't want to vote against your own party, but you would not, in fact, vote for something you didn't want. I never took the whip away from anyone. They have duties to their constituents as well, and it seemed to me quite absurd. You should have said, all right, you've put us in difficulty, but we respect this. We'd have got far more cooperation in the future. Really, I don't like it when they act rather like an overpowering headmaster. It's no good. It won't do. You're not dealing with that sort of person. Each of these has been elected by their constituents.
There are those who used to compare you to a headmistress.
I never took the whip away. Headmistresses perhaps have a certain wisdom and common sense.
And in terms of the future now, we've set out the ideas. You set out your ideas for what should be done on Europe. How do you feel about those people who say that you're doing an Edward Heath? You're doing what Edward Heath did to you. You're doing to John Major, as opposed to the way Wilson handled Callaghan. That you were doing, perish the thought, a Ted Heath on John Major.
No, Ted is still in the House of Commons. I got out so that there was no question of doing that. No question. But I simply cannot surrender my right of free speech and my duty to give my view from a great deal of experience.
And if you had your time over again, would you have made John Major your choice as your successor?
Yes.
You still feel that?
Yes. He was the best of the three who were available at the time.
And there was no...
And I would still reaffirm that.
And in terms of Tony Blair, you paid a great compliment to him. You said he is probably the most formidable leader we've seen since Gaitskell. I see a lot of socialism behind their front bench, but not in Mr. Blair. I think he genuinely has moved, do you think?
I think he genuinely has moved. He says he agrees with some of the things which I did, although the whole party fought me tooth and nail against it, and these things would never have come about but for me. But when you then go to look, all the trade union reforms we did, you then go to look at the social charter, many of those would be undermined. And I personally think that what they're able to say now is, look, we're getting rid of a certain amount of socialism, we're wanting a third way, as the Social Democratic Party did. There is no third way. It's either socialism or a free society.
So there
Don't
is
go
no,
that way.
there
There's
is no third way,
way.
no middle way. A middle way doesn't
There
work.
is no middle
no
way.
compromise,
No, you're
consensus
look,
in the middle.
Sweden tried a middle way. They finished up by taking 70% of the output of Sweden under taxation into expenditure by the government. And only 30% of the people. Of course it did. And they even then got a deficit. Do you know why people at the moment are not perhaps quite so conservative as they were? Because they feel that we put on more taxes and they want to be able to have more of the fruits of their own work, to spend in their own way on benefiting their own children and building up their own ownership of a house. They're already rebelling against the extra taxation they've had. So if you went, and I'm sure you would get more under Labour, if you were only to listen to them, behind all this facade, listen to them, look at that social charter. It's a socialist policy, and just realize it before you get it back by the back door.
But you don't think that Tony Blair is a socialist? You think that there are socialists behind? You think he's given up socialism himself?
I believe he has moved, and I believe that, I say he's a very competent person. But if you look at the policies, you see there's a lot of rhetoric at the moment. Keep your eye on those policies and analyze them.
So that you don't agree with these people, some of them from the right, who say what the Tories need, what we need is a defeat so that we can go into opposition and regroup ourselves ideologically.
That's crazy. If you went into opposition, you may not get back for many years. They might change the voting system. I'll never forget what Jim Callaghan did, all the devices that he did to stay in power, the Lib-Lab Pact, and so on. If there is a disagreement with the present government on the part of the electorate, it's that it's not being conservative enough. People knew certainly what I believed. I believed that you were to give a bit of help by tax relief to people to buy their own houses. That's far better, help them to become independent owners than having to spend more money to build housing association houses or council houses. And they feel that they had faith in my policy, and they bought houses, and they've had the tax relief on mortgages cut 3 times, 3 years in succession. They feel they've had 3% tax put on insurance, which hits the home owner. They feel that they've had the married man's tax allowance reduced. They are saying to us, let's get the message. You've not been conservative enough. And I think that what we need to do is to reduce the tax on families.
What is the answer, do you think, to that?
Well, I personally think that the mortgage relief should be restored. I also thought that it should be what originally it was when the £25,000 upon which relief is gauged was introduced. It should be a much higher figure than that. We put it up to 30,000.
Simon Jenkins in the Times the other day, with all the controversy going on about your relationship with John Major and so on, came up with a long-argued case, saying really that John Major's been a very good Thatcherite, really, that he hasn't sold the past. John Major handled the 1991 treaty negotiations just as Lady Thatcher handled the 1986 Single European Act. And then he concludes, but on coal, the post office, energy prices, London hospitals and countless other Thatcherite issues, he risks reverse after reverse from his backbenchers rather than abandon the cause. The apprentice has sung the master singer's tune, prestissimo, if occasionally falsetto. He's saying that he's been just as good a Thatcherite as you were.
Well, I just indicated where I disagreed very firmly on something which goes to the heart and root of everything I believed in. And the answer to Simon Jenkins is quite simply this. I was turned out because I said to Europe, no, no, no. That no, no, no was turned into yes, yes. 2 yeses, not 3. He got the social charter out and he reserved his position on the single currency. So there is a difference. And insofar as there is a difference, I think that's why we do not at the moment have the full support of the public. But I hope we'll make it clear as an election comes up, there's a big gap between the parties in practice. And John has done many things, and John's still conservative. Very conservative, thank goodness, and he's going on to try to privatise. I think public expenditure has got up higher than I would have had it. I think, you know, women are better at saying no to some of these things than men.
Why is that?
But we can keep a tight hand on the purse strings. We have to sometimes.
You keep a tight
More
hand.
experience.
You mentioned the nicknames in the book that you were given and so on. Which were the memorable ones to you?
Well, the Iron Lady, I think, lasted long as Attila the Hen, I remember. The Russians nicknamed me the Iron Lady. They were quite right. It was a very good assessment.
And the headlines always said, Maggie stands for, Maggie does this, Maggie does. Is there anyone who's ever actually calls you Maggie?
Oh, yes, quite a lot of people. Oh, yes.
Do you quite like it?
Yes. I think it's a term of affection. Somehow it's softer than Margaret, isn't it?
Yes.
Maggie.
Yes, it is.
Softer than
Yes.
Margaret.
And
Although
does
Margaret means a pearl.
Does
A
it?
lovely luminescent stone. Yes. Yes.
And did Dennis, as it said in the Dear Bill letters, refer to you as the boss?
No. No.
No, that-
But then he didn't write the Dear Bill letter.
No, that's
Some
actually,
people think he did.
well, they were so accurate,
Yes,
some people said.
yes.
And in terms, you said in the book, you said that work was always your secret elixir, that if you were down or whatever else, work was always. Is it still your secret elixir?
Yes, I don't know what I'd do if I didn't work. It's what I still want to do. I can't see myself ever doing anything else. You can read, you can go to concerts, you can go to theatre, you can go and see the wonderful treasure chests that we have in London in the museums, you can have friends in. But I think to keep yourself in touch, you want still to keep working.
And in 10 years' time, would you be working as hard as you are today?
Well, Dennis is 10 years older than me, and he's still working.
So you don't really
see
admit to the
myself
word
giving up.
retirement. You,
No.
When we were talking a couple of years ago, when your first volume came out, I quoted some business magazine that said that you had personally accumulated 63 million. And to which you very
It
quickly...
must be mad. Pence?
Yes, well, pence indeed. And the...
I'm not sure how much that would work out.
Yes, but I mean, do you think of yourself now as wealthy?
No. I think of myself as running an office and comfortable. And it's nice to be comfortable. Very nice to be comfortable.
And
Yes.
do you think, so looking back with the benefit of hindsight, would you say that the Conservative Party made a mistake when they got rid of you back in November 1990?
Look, the old girl's had her chance, and we'll must have someone else. Who am I to complain? I got my chance, so I don't object to anyone else having theirs, and indeed I did everything I could to support John, and still do.
And in fact, in terms of that, would life be different? Would things be different if you were still there?
Yes.
In what way?
As different as my personality and beliefs are from what's going on at present. But don't forget, I had a big majority. I'd been there 11 and a half years. Some others said, all right, the old girl's over the hill, we'll get someone else. I wasn't over the hill. I'm not over the hill yet.